I wanna bring up probably the most important thing that I want you to know if you have not started fishing tournaments and you wanna start fishing tournaments, and that is, do not be discouraged if you have a bad day out. Last year, I did a poll on this channel to see how many of you guys actually fish tournaments. Out of nearly 5,000 votes, 22% of you said yes, 30% of you said no, and 47%, almost half of you said no, but I want to. Now, for those of you that said no and that you do not fish tournaments, I would never tell you to go out and fish tournaments. You do you. But for the 47% of you that want to start fishing tournaments, I'm gonna tell you today why exactly I think you should absolutely start as soon as you can, because they will help you to become a better angler. This video is brought to you by the Deep Dive app. This is an app that you can download on your phone that helps you to find and catch bass a lot quicker. Once you get to the body of water that you're fishing, you can actually select that lake. Then you can input data like water temperature, water clarity, whether you're fishing around a vegetation or not, or if you are fishing in a windy or protected area. The app will then spit out some locations, some strategies, and some lures that you can use to start attacking the body of water you are fishing. There is a 100% free version and there is a paid version, and if this interests you, there's a link down below in the description and you can download it right now. I actually fished my first bass tournament when I was 15 years old, which is crazy to think that that was over 17 years ago. At the time, I just had a few select rod and reels, but I remember jumping into these big local tournaments with a V-bottom aluminum boat and a 5 horsepower engine. We hardly had any lures, we didn't have any electronics, and I would use a Rubbermaid container as my live well. With all that being said, I'm just so thankful that I jumped into tournaments early because it just allowed me to learn a lot about bass fishing in a quick amount of time. And in today's video, I just want to talk about 5 big lessons that I learned from tournament fishing that would have taken me a lot longer to learn recreational fishing. Now, the first big thing, major lesson that I learned as a tournament fisherman that you will definitely learn is that the bass are always biting somewhere or on something. As a recreational angler, it's so easy to go out there and go fishing one day and maybe not catch the bass that great, and then you just kind of shrug off the day as it was a bad day of fishing. Now, the big thing that I've learned with tournament fishing is that the bass are always biting somewhere on the lake. You can always find an active group of fish somewhere. Now, I actually fished 6 years on the Bassmaster Open Trail, and this is something that I saw time and time again because there were days on the water where it was really tough for me to go out there and try to catch a 5 fish limit. And then you would get to the weigh-in and you just see guys constantly bringing in these big bags of fish, and you just think to yourself, man, I missed something. Now, I don't want this to sound bad and I don't want this to sound discouraging, because when I would come in with a mediocre bag of fish and see guys catching a lot of big fish, to me, it just made me want to be better. It made me want to be that guy who's coming into the weigh-in with that bag of fish. So what it has really helped me to do is that anytime that I go fishing, whether it's in a tournament or not, I know that the bass are biting somewhere, or like I said, on something. So it really just helps me to stay motivated out there on the water, to know that I could run into a school of fish or a pattern at any point in time. Now, with wanting to strive to be a better angler, this really brings me to my second big lesson that I've learned from tournament fishing, is that learning how to adjust faster can really help you to succeed out there on the water, whether that's just bringing in a 5 fish limit or cutting a check or winning an event. Now, as a recreational angler, a lot of times when we go out fishing, sure, we want to catch a lot of fish, but it's really about just the experience, about being out there and just kind of being away from everything else in the world. So you're not always so concentrated on making adjustments to help you to catch a lot more fish. Now, when you are in a time crunch, when you are in a tournament situation where you have a certain amount of hours to go out there and bring in a 5 bass limit, it really kind of forces you to adjust out there on the water. The biggest thing that tournaments have really helped me to get faster on is simply making the decision to either go somewhere else or pick up a different bait. Back in the day when I first started fishing tournaments, it might take me 3 or 4 hours to make that decision of, hey, these fish that I thought I could catch are not biting, so let's go try something else. Nowadays in a tournament, you know, this might be something that only takes me a half an hour or an hour to decide, or even less than that. And so making that decision quicker on the water means that you're giving yourself an opportunity to catch a lot more bass and a lot bigger bass. Now, moving on to the third big lesson that tournaments have kind of showed me is that it is all about the details. Now, this is something that you can see as a recreational angler. But again, when you have a certain amount of time to go out there and catch fish, you are really hyper focused on the details of where you caught fish. Literally every time that I catch a bass, especially a bigger than average fish in a tournament, I'm trying to break down everything that happened in that moment. You know, where was that fish? Was he on a drop? Was he near grass? Was he near a rock? Did he bite high in the water column? Did he bite on the bottom? There are so many different clues and details that you really start to focus on when you are tournament fishing that sometimes it just takes you a little bit longer to do when you are recreational fishing. Now, this isn't always true, but the reason that I think that it takes a recreational angler a little bit longer to recognize this is because if you go out there and you start catching a bunch of 1.5 pound, 2 pound fish, you know, that's something that even me, when I'm not tournament fishing, I just like to go do. I love to go out there and just catch a bunch of fish. But again, in a tournament, when you have a 5 fish limit, you really want to focus on the big bites. So you really pay attention to those big bites and how they are different than maybe going out and catching those 1.5 pound and 2 pounders. For example, I remember fishing a tournament on Oneida Lake. In this particular tournament, I was actually flipping and pitching grass lines for smallmouth bass. Pretty much a lot of the grass patches that I was hitting, I could catch fish out of. But what I recognized is that anytime I would find a grass patch that was kind of by itself, it was away from the main grass line, that is where I would catch that better than average fish. Now, if I was out there recreational fishing, I would just probably continue to fish different grass lines. But because I was tournament fishing, I recognized, hey, there's bigger fish in these really isolated grass patches. Let's just focus on those. I'm not gonna get near as many bites, but the ones that I get are gonna be bigger. Talking more about details, this is not just where bass are located. And this actually brings me to big lesson number 4 is that tournament fishing really helps you to fine tune the equipment that you're using. The rods, the rod actions, the reels, the gear ratios, the lines, the hooks, the lures, everything. A lot of times if I'm out there just fun fishing and I'm catching a few fish, but then I lose one, most of the time I'm not going to sit there and change out my hooks or think about how my rod and reel system could be different. And in tournament fishing, losing one fish can mean absolutely everything. If you lose that one big fish, it can cost you a lot of money. It can cost you dreams, to be honest. I mean, if you guys know my story, I actually lost a 6 pounder that was in my hand at Lake Champlain back in 2017. If I land that fish, I would have gone on to fish in the Bassmaster Elite Series. But because I lost that fish, I'm not in the Bassmaster Elite Series. Now, there are some times on the water where you do everything perfectly and you still lose a bass, but there are also a lot of times where you can really fine tune exactly what equipment you need to land more fish. And a perfect example of this is actually when I started to learn the spy bait. Years ago, I was fishing up in New York and I was getting on this spy bait bite, and I really started to fine tune my equipment over a week's period of time, because the first several fish that I hooked on a spy bait, I just continued to lose these fish. And the spy bait's a really heavy bait. It's easy for fish to throw it. And I just lost fish after fish. And I started changing my hooks. And I started changing my line. And then I ended up changing my rod. And when I changed my rod, it made the biggest difference on actually hooking and catching those fish as opposed to just losing a lot of those fish. The same thing has happened to me with a lot of different techniques out there. Once you start catching a lot of fish on a certain lure or doing a certain technique, you want to ensure that you can catch every single fish that bites you, because that alone will help you to do very well in tournaments. Those 4 big lessons have really helped me to become a better tournament angler. But number 5 is a big lesson that I really think has helped me the most, and that is dealing with weather conditions. A lot of times when you are fishing a tournament or you are preparing to fish a tournament, it really kind of forces you to be out on the water. And you might go out on the water in a lot of times where you would not go out there fun fishing. You know, I have seen flooded conditions and drought conditions or very rainy conditions or even, you know, storms that are coming through where most of the time I probably wouldn't be fishing that body of water. But because I am preparing or fishing a tournament, it kind of forces me to learn how the fish adjust in those weather conditions. And that helps me to be a better angler no matter when I go fishing. Because if I know, hey, a storm's coming up and these fish might start biting really quick, then I might know where to go and what to throw a lot quicker, where I can take advantage of that storm before it hits. So really learning how to deal with what the bass do in certain weather conditions has really helped me to become a better angler. Now, with all of this being said, I want to bring up probably the most important thing that I want you to know if you have not started fishing tournaments and you want to start fishing tournaments. And that is, do not be discouraged if you have a bad day out there. If you have a bad tournament, if you go out there and you get skunked and the guy who wins catches 30 pounds, that's okay. That happens to everybody out there. I don't care if you're Kevin Van Dam, Jacob Wheeler, Brian Thrift, the best fishermen in the world. They have all had days and still have days where they go out there and suck. That just happens. There's nothing bad about that as long as you learn from those mistakes. Now, if you actually want to see kind of how I go about breaking down water and finding fish, I did a video right here where I crammed about 4 hours into about 12 minutes so that you guys could see kind of the reality of finding and catching fish. So if you enjoyed this video, I think you'll like this one as well. Please comment below, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.